Hi, my name is Joshelle, and the film I chose for this video essay is Beautiful Boy, directed by Felix van Groningen. And in this analysis, I will be focusing on his use of flashbacks, a directorial choice that defines much of his style. Van Groningen uses flashbacks not simply to provide background information, but to collapse time and show how memory continues to shape the present. This technique is especially clear in the 6-minute sequence beginning at the 54-minute mark, which I will now examine. So the sequence begins with David lying on his bed at home when the phone rings. He's squirming around, as seen in this clip right here, and there's already some foreshadowing happening, which is another brief technique that Groningen uses. He answers the phone and a nurse asks him to confirm if Nick Sheft is his son. And as soon as the call ends, a low buzzing begins, which is very heavy and unnatural. The sound is not literal, it is an auditory expression of David's inner collapse, and by starting after the call, Van Groningen shows us the delayed weight of realization, which first comes the words, then the unbearable dread. And here he is on his way to the hospital, and he's talking to the nurse, and the sound keeps growing bigger and bigger and more louder. Though, while this moment seems like a sound design choice, it connects directly to Van Groningen's larger use of flashbacks, because the buzzing works almost like memory breaking through. The present moment itself becomes unstable, fractured, and, I guess, open to intrusion. The oppressive hum foreshadows how the film will soon collapse the boundaries between past and present, turning David's shock into a series of overlapping memories that he cannot escape. After the buzzing sound ends, the film suddenly cuts to Nick sitting in a bar. Now, we don't know how he got there or what happened in between, but right after that, we cut again to David in the airport looking very drained, assuming that he's just going back home because he found out that his son had escaped the hospital. And now he gets a phone call from his son, Nick Sheff. At first, this might just feel like a strange editing choice, but it actually works like a flashback in reverse. Instead of jumping to the past, Van Groningen jumps across time and skips over the details of the present. Just like a memory interrupts the flow of life, these cuts interrupt the flow of the story. The non-linear editing acts almost like a flashback because it reminds us that the emotional truth of addiction is not found in what literally happens, but in how those moments echo against memory. When the father and son finally meet in the bar, the pacing slows down. The camera lingers on Nick as he talks about being better, becoming sober, and how things are going to change. On the surface, his words are hopeful, but the camera then shifts to David, whose face shows a lot of doubt and unease. Now, even though this part doesn't have a literal flashback, memory is still very present. Every word Nick says reminds David of promises he's heard before. Van Groningen directs it so that the audience, like David, can't really separate this moment from the past moments that haunt it. Now, the next cut takes us to Nick in, I'm gonna assume, his dad's bedroom, sitting upright watching TV in bed. And for a second, everything looks normal, but then the cut cuts very sharply, like as seen right here, and he's collapsed on the floor while David is on the phone. There's no transition, no warning. Now, this harsh edit mirrors the way addiction works, as relapse doesn't always come with signs. It crashes in suddenly, and it also mirrors how a flashback feels. One moment you're in the present, the next moment you're thrown into a completely different reality. Now, David notices that his son is on the floor, and he stops his phone call, and he comes over to Nick, and he takes a blanket and he covers Nick with it. He then gently strokes Nick's hair. Van Groningen then makes a direct flashback cut, which can be seen over here. We see David doing the same thing years earlier when Nick was just a child. Now, this parallel between the two moments is very powerful. The gesture is the same, but the meaning is completely different. In the past, David was comforting a young boy with simple fears. He's singing Beautiful Boy by John Lennon. And in the present, now, he is trying to protect his son from an addiction that could kill him. The flashback makes the connection clear. Groningen uses this to emphasize that David's love is very constant, even though everything around that love has changed. After we see David covering Nick with a blanket and then cutting back to the earlier memory of young Nick in bed, Van Groningen pushes this use of flashback even further. The film cuts again, this time to another memory, David and a much younger Nick together at an airport. Here, the entire atmosphere shifts. The cold, dim tones of the relapse scenes are replaced with warm, soft lighting. The framing is much closer, more intimate, almost as if we're being invited to step into one of David's most precious memories. Nick is still a child here, innocent and safe, completely untouched by addiction. In this interaction between Nick and David, David asks for a hug, but Nick refuses. David gently asks if Nick is mad, and Nick nods. David realizes it's because Nick is going away to see his mom, so he reassures him that they'll still call each other while he's away. Here, Nick shakes his head no when David asks if he knows how much he loves him. And in here, he says, "If you can take all the languages in the world, it still wouldn't describe my love for you." On the surface, it's a simple line, but the placement of it at the end of the sequence makes it very devastating. It reminds us that love between them has always been there, even if the present feels hopeless. What makes this flashback so important is that Van Groningen doesn't use it to fill in missing story details. Instead, he uses it to collapse time. The past doesn't stay in the past, it bleeds into the present moment, shaping how David sees Nick and how he continues to hold onto him. The cut is almost dreamlike, as though David can't stop reliving these memories, because memory is the only thing that still feels whole. By ending the sequence with this flashback, Van Groningen makes it clear that memory isn't just part of the story, it is the story. Addiction fractures the present, but memory keeps David tethered to his son. For David, remembering Nick as a child is not just painful, it's also very necessary because it reminds him why he refuses to give up. This is Van Groningen's hallmark. Flashbacks are never just background information. They act like emotions themselves, breaking into the present without warning, reshaping the meaning of what we're watching. In this final airport memory, we see the clearest example of how this directing style works. Time is fractured, but love is continuous. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video essay.